I just opened my mic to say good morning.
Right on cue to start the meeting. I now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on February 1st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of science at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. I won't go through all the rules about COVID and wearing a mask. For those participating by video conference, when you're ready to speak, click on the icon to activate your mic, and please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, please make sure your mic is on mute. For interpretation, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either English, Floor, or French. And I'll remind everyone that all comments should be addressed to the Chair. I'd now, of course, like to welcome our witnesses here for today, albeit by Zoom. As individuals, we have Michael Dadswell, retired Professor of Biology, Acadia University. We have Ms. Alexandra Morton, independent scientist. From EcoTrust Canada, we have Tasha Sutcliffe, Senior Policy Advisor. From Watershed Watch Salmon Society, we have Stan Provost, Senior Scientist. And from First Nations Wild Salmon Alliance, we have Mr. Robert Chamberlain, Chairman. And I am informed that Mr. Chamberlain will need to sign off a little earlier today, only about 20 minutes or so to attend another meeting. If members could direct questions to him first, if they should have questions for him, it would certainly help out. And of course, witnesses can provide written submissions to the committee via the clerk. And Mr. Cormier, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can, just for a brief moment, and I don't want to take too much time, just regarding like what we've talked a little bit about the science study. Look, I think like the member will agree with me that, we need to hear from witnesses from throughout Canada. There's a couple of pressing issues that I think, especially like when we've talked a little bit about it, Mr. Perkins, Mr. Small, Mr. Morrissey, Callaway, about some decision that was taken regarding shrimp, for example, and for mackerel and herring. And I just want to have some clarification for a clerk, or maybe if we can maybe make sure that the next meeting on June 2nd, if we can hear from some of those witnesses, I think it will be good, especially regarding, the situation with shrimp, big quota drop this year, at least to have their view on it, like example from the Fédération Régionale des Pêcheurs Professionnels here in my riding, FFAW, some other association, and also some MFU maybe. So I'm just wondering if the committee will maybe, accept all the members that we hear on the next meeting from those groups. Don't get me wrong, witnesses on the screen. We love having witnesses from the West Coast, but there's also some issue here, and I would certainly like to have the opportunity to ask some questions to those groups, and I'm sure like my colleagues around the table, Ms. Debian and other, Mr. Perkins, Small, and my colleagues will certainly want maybe that to be moved up. I'm not sure when the clerk was able to fit those witnesses in. But if it will be possible to have them on June, I think 2nd, I hope that my colleagues around the table will agree with me on that. So I'm done there. So if there's some comment, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. Cormier. I noticed the clerk was nodding her head in a yes motion. So I believe that is the intent, to have those people at that actual meeting, if that suits your request. We haven't got to check into it any further than that. Mr. Small.
Mr. Cormier, Mr. Chair, mentioned FFAW. Would that be Keith Sullivan from our submitted witness?
I'm not sure who will attend, but like if we can have a panel of the group that was impacted by some of those decisions, like for example, for shrimp, for me, it will be the Fédération Régionale Acadienne des Pêcheurs Professionnels, for example. FFAW will certainly be one from your region. Madame Debian, there's a couple of groups also from your area in Quebec. So look, I'm not going to decide who's going to attend, but I mean, like, some of those associations should be there. They were impacted by some of those decisions, like the MFU for herring and mackerel, PIFA, for example. So I have a panel with those groups that was impacted on the East Coast with some of those decisions. That's what I'm kind of saying. So
I believe they're lining up those witnesses for, as you said, June 2nd. There's a number of groups that represent individual harvesters in different sectors that have either their name was put forward or they have asked to appear, and we're hoping to get that done sooner rather than later. June 2nd should work out okay. Thank you, Mr. Cormier. We'll start with our opening statements from witnesses. Mr. Chamberlain, you have 5 minutes or less, please.
Gela Kesla Nino ga Ninoxola, Nugo am Galaga me gash and laka Quacosutinuk, a Hotmis, Muskamok, Zaurino. We gachens Hutli Lachlam and Watlum Quatnala, Laman Watlum Kas Nokai Enum Localatly, British Columbia. I've acknowledged you all as knowledgeable and respectful people, giving me my traditional name of Galagame. I'm from what you may know as the Broughton Archipelago, and the words today that I'm going to share are from my heart on behalf of many, many First Nations of British Columbia. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present to you today. I open my testimony to you stating that the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance completely supports the previous FOPO meeting presenters, Andrew Bateman and Brian Riddell of the Pacific Salmon Foundation and Gideon Mordecai of the University of British Columbia. Their combined testimony outlines extremely well the absolute disaster that is the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat in relationship to the open net pen fish farm industry. CSAS, as a peer review secretariat, has zero credibility with the First Nation members of the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance. When one examines the CSAS process, this is of course no surprise at all. A so-called science peer review process that allows a proponent, fish farm company, industry, and stakeholders, industry associations, to participate from the beginning to the end of this process is utterly and completely lacking of any measure of objectivity or credibility. Canada's environment, wild fish, and citizens deserve far more from government. CSAS is a shining example of the environment within DFO that needs to be meticulously analyzed and restored back to its original mandate, the mandate of actually working to protect the environment and wild fish for Canadians. You would be hard-pressed to find a single First Nation in BC that would state that DFO is doing a good job in managing wild salmon in British Columbia. This is well earned, given that I cannot think of a single wild salmon run in BC that could be characterized as healthy or abundant. It's oft-spoken, the Aboriginal rights that First Nations have recognized in Section 35(1) of Canada's Constitution, and of course the Sparrow decision of Canada's Supreme Court, and the government's commitment to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. These three legal realities speak to food security. It has been said to me that 90% of BC First Nations rely upon wild salmon. 90% of 203 First Nations. This means that wild salmon are far more than a simple menu choice. It is the foundation for culture, traditions, and of course, a staple traditional food that is now becoming near impossible to attain for these purposes. The decision DFO Minister Joyce Murray will be making soon needs to be deeply guided by the legal realities of the Supreme Court of Canada and Canada's constitutional protection of Aboriginal rights. Simply stated, this is a case of rights versus the privilege of a license. DFO has accomplished measures of agreement in BC with some First Nations. I suggest that these will suffer in credibility and function if transitioning open net cage fish farms as committed to by this government and supported by all parties does not occur. A recent poll of British Columbians demonstrates vast support for this transition. I attended a recent DFO Ministers Roundtable for this transition. The framework questions to guide discussions were entirely predictable and offensive and frankly represented a buffalo jump of a predetermined outcome. This opinion was expressed very clearly by all First Nation chiefs whom attended, demonstrating further the need for substantive change within the DFO to remove science from management so a minister can enjoy clear information and recommendations that are unbiased, not to continue having government direction consistently undermined by DFO staff. This was abundantly clear in the recent Maui court decision of DFO Minister Jordan's decision for the Discovery Islands, where the Director of Aquaculture stated, which I paraphrase, that she had no idea that not issuing the fish farm licenses was being considered. This is preposterous, as I know for a fact that Ms. Allison Webb attended many of the First Nation consultation sessions with Discovery Islands First Nations, which I was part of. Not issuing these fish farm licenses was spoken of at every consultation session. Previous FOPO reports and both federal and provincial governments' commitments to UN DRIP call for greater involvement of First Nations in the management of wild salmon in British Columbia. This is also found within the previous DFO Parliamentary Secretary MP Terry Beach's What We Heard report, pertaining to developing and implementing the transition of open net cage fish farms from BC waters. This needs to occur. For today's topic of CSAS and science, First Nations can play a clear and objective role in this effort. One outcome of the Broughton Fish Farm LOU, which I helped negotiate, and of course is the first time Canada witnessed the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. One of the outcomes was the building of a genome lab housed at the Okanagan Nation Alliance hatchery. This prepares First Nations to accomplish science that is leading edge with an outcome that is focused solely on identifying disease and pathogen threats to constitutionally protected food security. True arm's length resourcing for this lab could be invaluable to safeguard severely depleted wild salmon and escape the environment of DFO as a captured regulator of the fish farm industry. Environment, wild salmon, and First Nations and the citizens of Canada deserve far better than what we are experiencing today. When I was part of the consultation process for Discovery Islands, the first question that I asked Jay Parsons was about the CSAS process itself. And I asked him about the proponent of science, about industry, and about stakeholders. This elicited about a 4-minute speech, non-answer.
Okay, Mr. Chamberlain, I'm going to have to end it there. We're going way over the allotted 5 minutes, and
thank you, sir.
Hopefully anything else will come out in the line of questioning that you need to say. We'll now go to Mr. Provost for 5 minutes or less, please. And I apologise if I didn't pronounce your name right.
That's fine. I've worked on salmon farming issues for almost 16 years for Watershed Watch. I believe this case study illustrates an unreported suppression of science by DFO to protect the salmon farming industry at the risk of wild salmon. My written submission includes evidence, e-links, and context, and can be found on watershedwatch.ca. Number one, in 2012, the Independent Cohen Commission made strong recommendations and reversed the burden of proof onto DFO to show salmon farms are a minimal risk. Paraphrasing recommendations 18 and 19, they concluded salmon farms in the Discovery Islands may be a risk to wild sockeye salmon unless DFO can show they are of minimal risk. They should be removed by September 30th, 2020 or sooner if evidence arises. I was on the steering committee of the first 5 CSAS risk assessments. Number 2, did DFO change the risk assessment plan midway to avoid inconvenient science? There are at least 2 DFO website references that state more than 9 risk assessments were planned. When DFO, including Jay Parsons, held a press conference on September 28, 2020, to reveal their evidence of minimal risk, we learned there were only 9 risk assessments, and assessments on sea lice and cumulative effects weren't done. Did DFO change the plan? In July 2015, DFO doctors Jones and Garver began lab studies on the effects of salmon lice on sockeye and the cumulative interactions with IHN virus. This research was published in Science Journals in 2019. The 2 studies made conclusions pertinent to Cohen's recommendations 18 and 19. Infection with L. salmonis caused a profound physiological impact to sockeye salmon, was one quote from a paper. Another, we conclude that the reduced survival in co-infected sockeye salmon resulted from the osmoregulatory consequences of the sea lice infections, which were amplified due to infection with IHNV. 3, DFO appears to obfuscate and cherry-pick science and misdirect Canadians and news media away from inconvenient science and precautionary action. When you go to the DFO media release of September 28, 2020, then you go to work to support recommendation 19, the e-link. Then you go to scientific research on sea lice. Logically, this would be the place to objectively and transparently list all the research to conclude sea lice are of minimal risk. Let's look at that link closely. Look at the sea lice on wild salmon section. This appears to link to DFO research projects, but no external studies are listed. One paragraph in the sea lice on wild salmon section generally encompasses a sockeye and sea lice research project. However, it talks about it as if it is still in progress. No findings are included in the paragraph. And when you click on the research abstract link under this sockeye project that appears to be still in progress, it goes to the wrong project. The correct DFO link describes a completed 2010 project and findings of significant negative impacts on pink chum and sockeye from sea lice. An ATIP includes a January 2017 statement from DFO Dr. Ian Keith to Adrian Paler. How can DFO science not share with their health management counterparts that they have data including that sockeye are the most susceptible species of Pacific salmon? Another ATIP from October 1st, 2020 includes questions from a Canadian news reporter to DFO and includes Timothy Sargent. They asked to see the information DFO relied on to conclude sea lice are of minimal risk. DFO responds to this question with 2 e-links and neither direct the reporter to the Jones and Garver sea lice, IHN virus, and sockeye research. Is this not obfuscation, cherry picking, and misdirection by some in DFO at the expense of precautionary action to conserve wild salmon? Thank you very much, committee.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Ms. Sutcliffe for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much for having me here today. For those who don't know me, I'm currently an independent contractor, and I'm here in one of my roles as a senior policy advisor for fisheries with EcoTrust Canada. I've spent 25 years looking at ways to realize fair, sustainable, and prosperous fisheries And I believe that fisheries as a renewable resource can be well managed for environmental, economic, cultural, and social objectives. Since we are here on the subject of science, I want to start by saying that though I've engaged in many scientific pursuits throughout my career, I am not a scientist by trade, and I have a deep respect for those who are. Today, I'm an outlier in that I'm focusing on the role of social science in fisheries management and the issue with the lack of focus and capacity on this. My area of work is on the West Coast. Many challenges face Pacific region fisheries: climate change, competition for space and species, species at risk, market shifts, you name it. Science is instrumental for identifying, monitoring, and resolving issues that arise from this complexity. But how do we prioritize scientific activities, build investment in these priorities, and leverage our findings? We first must have a policy framework that includes clear objectives across the full spectrum of societal priorities, and we must have a framework for science that supports these. The natural sciences are, of course, a critical and huge part of this, but practiced in isolation, it is not enough to get us where we want to go. Just like focusing our economists solely on big E economic metrics like GDP will not get us where we want to go. So where do we want to go? What are we measuring success against? For the most part, existing language is around economic prosperity and conservation. But for whom? At what geographic scale? At what time scale? Do we have consistent objectives around social and cultural outcomes and community well-being and health? I would argue that we could do much better at defining this, especially in the Pacific region, where we are lacking in a comprehensive policy framework that identifies clear objectives and little to no direction given on social, locally, economically relevant, and cultural outcomes. We do have a number of resources which identify key considerations for fisheries in Canada, and many of them do touch on the socioeconomic and cultural importance of them. In this committee's 2019 study on the subject of West Coast fisheries, it was pointed out that key priorities of a sustainable fishery include the environmental, economic, and social aspects of sustainable development, and that there is a need for explicit socioeconomic objectives and policies. And further, the study recommended that DFO collect socioeconomic data to inform regulation. Most recently, in the report titled What We Heard Out of the Engagement Process for the Blue Economy Strategy, social equity, cultural, and local economic considerations were raised many times as a priority, including in fisheries. The latest Fisheries Act itself states that the minister may consider, among other things, social, economic, and cultural factors in the management of fisheries. But how is the minister to consider socioeconomic impacts and outcomes if we have no science to base those considerations on? There needs to be a way to provide both natural and social science and intersect these findings, not compartmentalize them. It just so happens we do have a start to this, as the Canadian Fisheries Research Network developed one. This 50-person team, 6 years of research, were published in 2 major peer-reviewed publications. The network recognized 4 pillars of sustainability: ecological, economic, sociocultural, and institutional or governance, and developed a full framework that articulates the scope and candidate objectives and values of these 4 pillars. This sounds like a great start. Let me be clear. This is not an argument meant to alter scientific priorities to diminish necessary outcomes around conservation. Quite the contrary. It is to ensure that where decision-making has the potential to achieve conservation outcomes and maximize societal benefits, this is enabled. The absence of this focus results in unnecessarily harmful policy which can take decades to unravel. Take the example of licensing policy outcomes in the sea cucumber fishery. In this lucrative fishery, the lion's share of landed value is not going to the harvesters, but is being lost to, in many cases, non-local license owners and fish companies leasing the license, who land and sell the product and then pay the fish harvester a fraction of the fair landed price. Further, this species has the ability to provide high value in processing jobs and wholesale margins, and yet this also is being exported. Science can investigate issues such as this, compare scenarios around solutions for decision-making that achieve environmental goals and maximize societal benefits. We are in precarious times. We require new ways of doing business and innovation in our economic system that ensures we are contributing to a better quality of life for current and future generations and promoting resilience in the natural and social systems that we rely on. This is ever challenging in the face of disastrous events such as pandemics and climate change impacts, which can bring our current system to its knees. We must be able to respond quickly and adapt in times of crisis. It is more crucial than ever to manage our renewable resources to this end, and this requires a comprehensive, multi-pillared approach to science and informed decision-making, but will result in a much stronger foundation on which to move forward in sustainable development. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts and experience with you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Morton for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. The questions you pose are critical to Canadians because DFO management of wild salmon has failed to maintain the fish or the fisheries. Wild salmon must reach the open ocean, and salmon farms are a barrier to them. The problem is, as salmon farms release unnatural levels of types of pathogens, wild salmon exposed to the farms breathe them in, and these pathogens come into direct contact with their bloodstream. Most wild salmon from the southern half of BC are currently inoculated with industrial aquaculture pathogens from Maui, Cermak, and Grieg, and they become carriers. Now, here are 3 examples of DFO actively avoiding appropriate response to this risk. In 1990, Director General DFO Pacific Region, Pat Shamoot, wrote to the Director of Trade Policy, continued large-scale introductions of Atlantic salmon eggs would eventually result in the introduction of exotic disease agents, of which the potential impact would be biologically damaging and economically devastating. He was right. The Norwegian PRV virus was in some of those 30 million eggs. In 2013, Maui told the federal court that they would be severely impacted if they were prohibited from transferring PRV-infected fish into their farms because their hatcheries were infected. While PRV is considered a disease agent everywhere in the world except British Columbia, DFO hid the science showing PRV causes organ failure in Chinook salmon and thus allowed this Norwegian blood virus to escape DFO regulations and spread into the Skeena, Fraser, and everywhere in between. And 95% of farm salmon for sale in BC supermarkets is infected. During the 2020 consultations between the Minister of Fisheries and 7 First Nations of the Discovery Islands on the renewal of 19 salmon farm licenses, Dr. Miller Saunders briefed DFO's Director of Science that young Fraser sockeye were being infected with the bacteria Tenacibaculum as they passed the salmon farms in the Discovery Islands, and these fish appeared to die. The Director of Science went and briefed the BC Salmon Farmers Association with this information, but not the minister, even though the primary concern of the nation she was consulting with was the impact of salmon farms on Fraser sockeye. Third case, DFO staff know that sea lice in salmon are dangerous to young wild salmon. They set a limit on the number of lice per farm salmon in the aquaculture conditions of license. But Maui, Cermak, and Grieg farms are unable to meet this threshold. On January 24, 2022, Maui wrote to Rebecca Reed, Director General, DFO, Pacific Region, stating the proposed changes to the conditions of license could have significant impact on the financial performance of Maui's operation. Specifically mentioning sea lice, they say, the pace of regulatory change is outpacing our company's capacity. 2 weeks later, the draft conditions of license contained the weakened requirement to produce a plan to reduce sea lice, with no requirement that the plan was actually successful. Maui's letter is a statement that the salmon farming industry cannot survive regulations that protect wild salmon, and it's clear wild salmon are not surviving without these regulations. So here's my recommendations to your questions. Issue conditions of license that provide immediate and significant relief to wild salmon and clarity to the salmon farming industry, and see my written submission for specifics. Form a non-government board of scientists to monitor DFO's response to science. Create a regional director of wild salmon as per Cohen Commission recommendation number 4, and populate this division with the scientists who are developing the powerful genomic tools that pinpoint the choke points that are killing wild salmon to allow highly strategic response reverse extinction curves. Collaborate closely with First Nations. Make this data open access, allowing the mathematical modelers who charted our path through COVID to inform the minister. If we do this, we expect these outcomes. In closing, I just want to make sure you know 36 salmon farms have been or will be removed by the Namgis, Kwasutanik, Mamalilakala, Gwawanak, Quaker, Klahus, and Homelco First Nations. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Dodswell for 5 minutes or less, please. You're on mute.
There we go. I seem to be the odd person out here, being a scientist that used to be involved in DFO and used to go to CSIS meetings all the time. I'm a retired professor of biology from Acadia University in Wolfville, so I'm also the only person on the East Coast rather than the West. And for 55 years or so, I've been working on Atlantic salmon, sturgeon, lobsters, scallop aquaculture, impact of tidal turbines on fishes, and freshwater ecology. And I work for the Canadian Wildlife Service, the Huntsman Marine Laboratory, the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans for 9 years, and then I was at Acadia University for about 30. Through that, I've published about 255 papers and technical reports and so forth. Now, I'm hoping I might be able to add a little bit to this context that's coming out of this meeting in terms of sea lice and salmon. That will be the Atlantic salmon in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Pacific. But first, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my CSIS experience. Seeing as how I was in DFO for 9 years, and they have approached me on other things, I have quite a background with CSIS. Basically, my opinion is the handling of different interpretations of scientific evidence and uncertainties in CSIS was a process that was one of my sore points while I was an employee of DFO, and later as a research scientist at a university, and finally as a retired fisheries scientist. I have found that differing opinions on data and conclusions that are contradictory to DFO policy and unsanctioned by CSIS are most often totally unwelcome and usually ignored. And I can say that on the power of being in on at least 20 CSIS meetings, maybe, for different species and so forth. And my first one was in 1979 when I was a freshman working in DFO, basically, and I participated on a number of meetings on the Canso Causeway and what it might have done to the fisheries on the east coast of Nova Scotia, which was really a total disaster at the time because the lobster fishery had collapsed. And I came up with some interesting scientific observations, which I thought as a scientist I was supposed to do. But when I brought them before the committee, basically I was essentially put down. They said, oh no, we don't agree with that. And it was, you know, stuff that came from other lobster fisheries in other parts of the world on how they recruit and so forth and so on. So we had to write the papers to go into the CSIS report and into the technical report publication. And my paper was directly opposed by the lobster, biologists and managers in DFO. I was in a different unit, actually, so I wasn't in the management unit. And literally, when I published a paper in the technical report, they put a page at the end of it saying they disavowed to have anything to do with this. So anyway, that's my start with CSIS. The funny thing is that as time goes by, scientific opinions change, and the present DFO lobster group now accept my original hypotheses as to why the Canso Strait and Eastern Coast lobster fishery collapsed, and are using it in their management decisions. How about that, eh? A similar process took place when I was working on the development of tidal power while I was still in DFO. This would be about 1979, 1980, 81. And I had a research group that was looking at the Annapolis River in Nova Scotia, which was up for having a test turbine put in. So anyway, when I went into the CSIS meetings on that, I was directly, well, first off, what I say, as a scientist, I spent about 6 months researching what turbines, hydroelectric turbines, do to fish. And it's not a very pretty picture. Lots of mortality. So here they were going to put this big, huge turbine in the Annapolis River, and it was going to affect all the fish populations as far as I was concerned. And I was, again, completely ignored. I was probably the only one who actually knew how fish turbines kill fish and so forth at the time. And what happened, jumping forward to the present, is that 35 years later, they finally closed the Annapolis turbine down because it was killing all the fish in the Annapolis River. Guess what? And, and originally, I was in the meeting and said, don't do it. But anyway, they don't seem to listen very much. The final example I want to give you is Atlantic salmon in the Atlantic Ocean. And most of you probably do not know this, but right now, and I just finished writing a paper on this, titled The Decline and Impending Collapse of the North Atlantic Population of Atlantic Salmon. And that is what's happening. Virtually all the big rivers that have over 100,000 Atlantic salmon fish runs are now collapsing in the Atlantic Ocean. And I brought this up in 1998 and 2000 to the Minister of Fishery at the time, and I told him I thought that IUU fisheries were causing the problem, that Japan, Denmark, and probably other nations were out there taking the Atlantic salmon in the open ocean before they could come back to the Atlantic rivers. Now, you don't have this problem so bad in the Pacific Ocean because you've got a very good anonymous fisheries group there that does surveillance. So they are keeping the Japanese and the other people, Chinese, in check to a degree and allowing the fish runs to remain quite good in places like Alaska. You're having more problems in BC. I understand that completely. But what has happened in the Atlantic Ocean is that rivers like the Miramichi, the Foyle in Ireland, which had a huge salmon run, and now the Tana River in northern Norway, which is also 100,000, 200,000 fish run, have collapsed and are all closed to fishing, not only commercial, but recreational. And here in 2000, I was telling the Canadian DFO minister about this, and it was going through a CSIS meeting. I wasn't invited, but in the end, they told me I was, foolish and so forth and so on, and they didn't agree with my conclusions. The example in Nova Scotia where I live, there used to be about 100 Atlantic salmon fishing streams. Now only 3 are open to recreational fisheries, and of course the commercial fishery was closed in 1984.
Okay, so, I'm going to have to end it there, Mr. Dadswell. It's gone way over the 5-minute allotment of time. But thank you to all our witnesses for their opening statements. We'll now, of course, move to questioning. But before I do that, I want to recognise as well Miss Elizabeth May, the MP for Saanich Gulf Islands, has joined us on Zoom, and I'll put in a little plug for her that I'm sure if anybody has a few minutes to spare, she'd like to get in some questions. If she was here in person, she'd have her hands out asking for that, so I thought I'd throw it in. We'll first go to Mr. Perkins for 6 minutes or less, please, and I'll remind members to identify who the question is for, so you're not losing your time staring at the screen. When you're ready, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming to this important study. I think it's our fourth witness meeting on it, and we've learned a lot from the scientists that have been before the committee. And I'd like to specifically also welcome Dr. Dadswell, since he is a constituent of mine as well, so to the committee. So perhaps I'll start with Dr. Dadswell. You spoke quite a bit about the CSAS process and the fact that the science you were doing, even as a scientist within DFO, was being rejected by CSAS. What factors were they telling you over and above that said, well, we don't accept this? Was it science from outside, or was it policy or socioeconomic issues that they put over, or did they have contradictory science to what you were proposing?
No, it was scientific issues. Basically, as a scientist, and I remember this is when I was a freshman in DFO, and I worked out this hypothesis about why the eastern coast of Nova Scotia fishery collapsed back in 1950s and 60s and 70s. And I don't know, I thought this was rather interesting from a scientific point of view. But when I spoke about my scientific findings in other fisheries in other parts of the world and compared that to our problem, it was more or less against policy. I mean, they weren't going to pull the Canso Causeway out, and that was what the trouble was. So my viewpoint based on science was completely ignored. Now, the interesting thing is that the new group in lobster management on the East Coast agrees with me completely, and they're using my research as the basis for their present management.
Thank you. Could I ask you a bit about the lobster science that's conducted now? I know you did a lot of it over your career, particularly in helping to create the lobster fishing areas and seasons that we have now. But in particular, how do they measure, how does DFO measure scientifically the health of the lobster stocks?
I'd say it's basically depends on the landings. As far as I can see, there are area scientific studies going on. I know when I was in DFO, we had a fairly big project going in southwest Nova Scotia. I don't know whether that one's still going through, but it might be. And we had another one in Prince Edward Island. But really what DFO does is they look at landings and make most of their decisions, a posteriori on what's going on. So, other than that, and some basic lobster biology that they do science on, those are the things that they're really working out. My hypothesis back in 1979 was that the egg drift, the larval drift of lobsters through Canso Causeway and down the eastern coast of Nova Scotia was cut off when the Canso Causeway was built. And when they cut that off, the lobster stock collapsed from normal fishing. There was no recruitment, right? So
if I could, because I have limited time, I want to ask you a couple more questions.
Okay.
So so it sounds like there isn't actually any real understanding of the size of the biomass of the lobster stocks. It's basically based on landings, and landings have been growing every year relative to effort, and that's in the inshore. Are you aware that in the offshore, LFA 41, which is the largest area and the only area of the lobster fishery that actually has a TAC, a total allowable catch, are you aware, was there ever any science done to determine whether or not that is a reasonable size of a TAC? I think it's 77,000 metric tons. Is there any science to support that?
Yes, that research was done during the 1980s. I'm trying to remember the name of the fellow that was involved in it, but he did do 3 or 4 years of work out on Browns Bank and so forth and so on to develop the TAC for that fishery.
So there hasn't been any science done on the state of the lobster stock in Alpha 41 since the late 1980s that you're aware
Not
of?
that I know of.
Wow.
But I may be, I may be wrong. I'm not right up to date on who's doing what research where. But
if I could
I
ask,
haven't seen anything.
Okay, if I could ask one more question related to Atlantic salmon, how relative to the size of the declining returns that we're seeing every year in Atlantic Canada, Atlantic salmon, what is the scale of what you believe is being done? I presume it's outside our 200-mile limit on the IUU fishing that's happening, and is DFO monitoring that at all?
No, I don't think anybody, including DFO, is actually monitoring it. Basically, what happened is that through negotiations, they were able to close down the West Greenland fishery to a large degree and give it a quota. Unfortunately, the same salmon that go up the coast of West Greenland then come down to the Labrador Strait and out into the area off Newfoundland and between Newfoundland and Greenland, where outside the EEZ zone, the economic limits, and there's absolutely no surveillance by NASCO. I mean, NASCO really, the North Atlantic Salmon Commission, is a joke. They haven't done one lick of surveillance since they took over in 1984. So basically, the problem that was happening in Greenland, where all the scientists agreed the Greenland fishery was going to collapse the salmon stock, just moved down the way a little further south, and everybody went right back to fishing salmon without any big problem. And between 1985 and 1990, the salmon stocks in the Atlantic Ocean dropped by 55%. And then since then, it's just been a continual tail off. And I think what's happening is, any salmon they miss in that area, then they go and try and get somewhere off East Greenland, which is in the middle of nowhere, as everybody knows. Nobody lives up there, and anybody can do pretty much what they want to. So the IUU fisheries are just hammering the place. And we're the only big river left with a really good salmon run up until 2020 was the Tana River in northern Norway and Finland, and it just got closed for fishing this year because of the collapse of that stock. And it won't be long before there's no Atlantic salmon stocks in good shape left, period.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Your time has gone a bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. We could keep you here all day, I am sure. And it sounds, Mr. Dadswell, your description of what's going on the East Coast, it sounds like science is under stress everywhere. I want to ask a few questions of Alex Morton. First, a comment on how much we miss the big voice of Rafe Mayer out of the West Coast, because he kept the issues right in front of everybody on a continual basis. Sea lice. You had done an awful lot of work on sea lice, and this is even before the Discovery Islands so-called studies. And I believe that you carried those studies over past the point at which many of the operations were either reduced or shut down. Can you report on what you observed on the sea lice infestation on wild salmon?
Yes, so just very briefly, sea lice are very easy to study because they change their body shape every few days, and so you know where they get on the fish. So I studied them in the Broughton Archipelago since 2001, and then when the previous minister, Bernadette Jordan, prohibited restocking of the Discovery Island farms because of where the companies were in their production schedule, last spring, all of the farms in the narrow channels of the Discovery Islands, Okosolo and Nodales, were empty. And so I went down there, and the sea lice levels had absolutely plummeted. Instead of getting up to 9 lice per fish, there was 2 lice total on 50 fish. And the condition of the fish was remarkable. These little pinks and chums were perfect. Their eyes were black, their bellies were round. And those pink salmon will be returning this year. And I'm predicting somebody south of the Discovery Island, some river, is going to get a lot of fish back, a lot of pink salmon, because of what Minister Bernadette Jordan did.
Well, it's entirely regrettable that, we've had that setback, I think in part due to the so-called science that was presented as well. And Mr. Chamberlain, it was troubling to hear that in the Federal Court of Appeal process, some of the First Nations communities up and down the coast, I think, concerned about the economic impacts of shutting down those operations, weren't as supportive of Minister Jordan's decision as they might have been prior to that. Was that your observation?
I was part of the team for the Omalco First Nation, Tla'amin First Nation, and Klahoose First Nation. So I can speak about the input from them within the consultation process. There was absolutely no support for the fish farm licenses to be renewed. The opinion, the understanding first, and then the opinion of the CSAS process was foundational to that position. And when you consider that the 9 science papers that came out of CSAS were the DFO's response to Cohen recommendations 18 and 19, and now we have verified and seen just the clear lack of objectivity in the analysis and delivery of those 9 science papers, Minister Jordan made the correct decision, because the nations that I was working with were very clear about the concerns that they expressed in consultation for First Nations of the Fraser River, because we were discussing migratory salmon. And so knowing that the impacts from fish farms in Discovery Islands have a long reach well up the backbone of British Columbia, which represents the infringement of Aboriginal rights. And so, as I understand it, all 7 nations that were consulted were opposed to fish farms being in operation. But since then, a couple have changed their opinion, and I'll leave that to you to surmise why that occurred.
Back to you, Ms. Morton. We occasionally have asked the DFO about the Cohen Commission recommendation to establish a regional director for salmon. And they mumble an answer that basically says we haven't done it and we're not really that involved in getting it done. If such a director was to be established, a directorate, would you recommend that it be situated outside of the DFO?
I honestly think that both have to happen. I think that DFO has to have a watchdog at this point to make sure the science is getting through. But unless it's happening inside, I just don't see how the minister is going to be properly briefed. We currently in British Columbia have the leading scientists on studying the health of wild salmon. And these are the young scientists that are now working with Dr. Miller Saunders. The power of that science is unparalleled. The fish can actually speak to us using the triggers in their immune system. We can find out exactly what is going on. And if this data was brought to the minister, she could learn, okay, if we remove this, this is likely to happen. And then once you do that, you can go back and check the immune system of the fish again and see if it worked. So I don't understand why we have this big, aggressive, powerful aquaculture management division in DFO and nothing to counterbalance it with the wild salmon. I've looked for the person in charge of wild salmon in DFO, and there is nobody, which is astonishing. Aquaculture's thriving, wild salmon are collapsing. It's pretty clear they need advocates within DFO.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
For 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Once again, I find the testimony very interesting, and I wish to thank you for being here today. I'd like to draw a parallel with the testimony from Dr. Dominique Robert from the Institute of Research of Rimouski on the contribution of social sciences among the scientists with additional considerations that ought to be taken into account. I spoke to Ms. Sutcliffe. Did I pronounce it right? Ms. Sutcliffe? Anyway, and I would like to ask her, in her opinion, what would be the contribution of social sciences, specifically, if she could give us a specific example to make a distinction in terms of DFO decision-making.
Sorry, do you mean like how an outcome could have been different in an existing example, or example of contributions to social science in terms of like categories of indicators that could be employed?
Yes, precisely that.
Okay. Yeah, well, some examples of the kind of socioeconomic data that I feel is really important to inform decision making. You could categorize it in different ways. One example would be when looking at economics, something that's brought up regularly is the equitable distribution of benefit. I think it's a really crucial indicator around how economics are benefiting and who they're benefiting. In terms of social, there is like the actual ability to access resources, diversity in occupation, community relationships. Culturally, there's traditions and knowledge, preservation of heritage sites. Just as examples, on health, there's of course indicators around physical and mental health. In governance, there's transparency and access to information and engagement and voice. In terms of physical assets, there's things around sort of the level of community infrastructure. So there's a lot of different ways that social science can be networked under sort of a suite of categories. And I think that, you know, very quickly when you start to look at this broader range of sort of societal intended outcomes, it can inform decision making. And another example that
I'd like to interrupt you there because we have limited time, but thank you. It gives us a good idea. Along the same line of thinking, Mr. Morton, regarding foreseeability, when it is announced, for example, in the eastern part of the country, in Quebec, it's been announced that they're going to completely break off herring and mackerel fishing. And Dr. Robert once again told us that this is something that was foreseeable. How can we improve the foreseeability in the area of decision-making of drastic DFO decisions? Is there science? Are there scientists who can bring more clarifications so that fish harvesters who are suffering these harsh decisions could have planned ahead and reorient and have some support to reorient their fishery?
Well, I think this goes back to the building a better pathway between the science and the minister, because there's been warnings about the decline of wild salmon, very, very strong warnings. But because a lot of it has been suppressed, that the fishermen just don't really grasp what is going on. And so I believe that a Department of Wild Salmon within DFO, a director of wild salmon, is absolutely critical to provide clarity to all sides of this issue.
You still have 1.5 minutes.
Quelle chance!
Oh, great. Well, I hesitated to turn to him, but Mr. Provost, I had trouble pronouncing his name, but he's the second witness after Mr. Chamberlain. I'm sorry I can't pronounce his name, but I found his testimony very interesting. You were quite clear about the fact that DFO chooses scientific data that are the most convenient for DFO. Can you give us a specific example of that?
Yeah, I kind of go over this in my document that has a lot more detail and synthesis and the actual specific references. But essentially, we had a federal inquiry that put the onus on DFO to show that salmon farms were of minimal risk. My experience was that there were initially going to be 10 risk assessments. I assumed one of them would be sea lice. One risk assessment needed to be on sea lice, really. And as we moved from 2012 to 2020, which was this kind of deadline that the Cone Inquiry put on DFO to come up with this evidence, soon it appeared that there were only going to be 9 risk assessments. And in the meantime, there were some pretty interesting lab studies being conducted in DFO looking at sea lice effects on sockeye. And I personally believe that DFO maybe changed the plan because that research turned out to be quite significant in showing that sea lice dramatically affect the health of sockeye salmon. And then so DFO started to communicate about this evidence that they had of minimal risk. But they don't talk about these studies at all in their communications at the press conference or later on when they talk to media people. So I think it's because this research was inconvenient. And that's kind of my clear example that I illustrate in my document.
Thank you, Madam Debienne. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who are here to talk about this important topic. My first question I wanted to direct to Galagame, and I want to use the traditional name, Mr. Chamberlain, of course. I just want to take a moment to thank you for all of your work, Bob, in the protection of wild salmon and continued work in around Indigenous rights. And wanted to ask you if you could expand a little bit around the precautionary principle and how it applies to fish farm operations and what the trickle effect might be from the lack of or the current state of precautionary principles that's in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa Marie, for using my traditional name. Mm-hmm. Greatly appreciated. In terms of the precautionary principle, during the consultation process for Discovery Islands, that was a big part of the discussions. And we learned that there is no policy pertaining to fish farms in British Columbia to implement the precautionary principle. We were told that they gather what we described as small little tidbits and amass that as some measure of implementation of a precautionary principle. And to me, when you understand, this is unacceptable when you understand the precautionary principle began after the East Coast cod collapse, which we're all well too aware of. And now that we've had 9 science papers categorically dismissed through examination of the CSAS process, the precautionary principle begs for the removal of fish farms from coastal British Columbia.
Thank you. Galagame, you spoke quite a bit about the importance of salmon, not just for a very nutritious food source, but around the importance of culture and tradition to Indigenous people. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit around your thoughts on how fish farms may or may not infringe upon Indigenous rights.
Thank you for the question. When you consider that there were no salmon rivers directly adjacent to the fish farms in Discovery Islands, the whole consultation process was about the impacts to migratory salmon. And so when that is the basis, and then when you consider the Supreme Court ruling of the Haida and the Taku Tlingit, even the potential to infringe on Aboriginal rights triggers the duty to consult. So when we know, and DFO acknowledges, that Fraser River salmon, all stocks, not just sockeye, but all stocks, migrate through the Discovery Islands, we must, if we're in all good conscience to live up to a Supreme Court law and the Constitution of this country, the minister must understand that the infringement of Aboriginal rights from fish farm operations extends far beyond site-specific. And it does trigger the duty to consult, which I have never seen DFO even want to contemplate. And I believe it's because the vast majority of British Columbia First Nations we've identified 102 that support the transition of fish farms out of the ocean. And so the DFO minister and the Canadian government must understand the infringement of rights from the operation of open net cage fish farms extends across British Columbia.
Thank you, Glagame. I want to direct my last question to you as well to make sure we're able to soak in as much time as possible before you leave early. You had mentioned an encouraging step for Indigenous-led science, specifically speaking to the genomics project in the Okanagan. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit further about this project, how it was developed, and why this is so encouraging for you.
Thank you. The Broughton Archipelago Fish Farm LOU with the province of British Columbia was shared recommendations and shared decision-making implementing the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, which of course the federal government has committed to do as well. One of the outcomes was the Genome Lab, because DFO created as many hurdles and speed bumps for us to do the testing that was agreed upon in the agreement through the Genome Lab in Nanaimo at the Pacific Biological Station. So we said, let's put together a proposal and build a genome lab that doesn't have those kinds of impediments to the outcomes of the chosen science that we wanted to pursue. And as a result of that, the Genome Lab is built in the Okanagan Nation Alliance hatchery. It has been, as far as I understand, this past year has been about training and capacity, because it's far more complicated than just putting a sample in and pushing the green button. So we're at a place now where this is going to be ready to be functional. And in terms of objective science, which clearly is not present within CSAS and the DFO, and the stated path of federal and provincial governments to work with First Nations on wild salmon, this is an opportunity that the government must embrace, a clear opportunity to advance many of the commitments, but most importantly, objective science that can then guide decision-making. And in terms of the question that was given to Alexander Morton, who our family know as Gwayumzi, the question about a manager of wild salmon, we need one, we need a First Nation role there because of our constitutionally protected rights, because of the special place that we have in this country. And it would be something that would be fundamental to reconciliation, foundational across British Columbia.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. That's your time is up. We'll now go into our second round of questioning. We'll start with Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for appearing today. It's a very interesting testimony that we've heard throughout this study. And I want to bring us back to how this study motion was worded so that we're focusing on where we really need to get our testimony for the final report. And the study motion was dealing with how DFO prioritizes resources and develops science studies and the advice for the department, and how the results of those scientific studies are communicated to the minister, and how the minister applies that advice in the ministerial decisions. I'll start off with Mr. Chamberlain, if I could. Pardon me if I don't pronounce your traditional name, Galadame, but very nice to hear that. Mr. Chamberlain, in recent months, we've seen the emergence of coalitions of salmon farmer operators, Indigenous partners, and these coalitions that are arguing that Indigenous partners have the authority to decide whether salmon farms operate in their communities or not. And we're also hearing from some of your testimony today that the effects on wild salmon affect fish or salmon that migrate through their entire migratory routes. In your opinion, how should the Government of Canada approach the scenario where Indigenous rights for different First Nations appear to be at odds?
When we think about First Nations and lands and decision-making and consent as the government pursues this, it would be fine and wonderful if the impacts remain site-specific, but clearly they don't. And so this being the reality and the fact associated with migratory wild salmon, the government is now in a position where they would definitely need to hear First Nations perspectives on consent, but it must also be balanced with what impacts occur, which are infringement of Aboriginal rights across the province. And many times in consultation, many First Nation leaders have heard that the government has made a decision contrary to what's been presented in consultation for the greater good, for the greater benefit of Canadians. Well, that, as sorrowful as it is when it occurs, it must come into play on this discussion, because the impacts of Fraser River salmon writ large, not just sockeye, is occurring where the fish farms are operating in Discovery Islands. And so that is where I think the Crown needs to do, is balance the impacts and the number of nations' rights who are being infringed, rather than the few jobs and the very small number of First Nations that are supportive of this industry. Let's not lose sight of that. That new coalition started out at 17, and then they misrepresented a number of nations, including mine. And I think it dwindled down to a list of 8 or 9 First Nations that are supportive. Thank you.
Good, thank you. You mentioned just moments ago about I believe you stated something along the lines of objective science is not present within DFO, and you mentioned the genome lab that has started in the Okanagan Nation, or the Okanagan Alliance hatchery in Penticton. I've had the opportunity to tour that hatchery and seen some of the success that they're achieving there. Can you elaborate a little further on the lack of objective science, on what you were referring to there?
In my earlier remarks, I highlighted what Mr. J. Parsons' response was to me when I dissected and presented the CSAS process. And when I say lack of objective science, I'm speaking about CSAS in relationship to open neck cage fish farms. And when you have a proponent being fish farm company number 1, and then involvement of industry, which is fish farm companies 2, 3, and 4, and then stakeholders being multi industry associations that can be brought in and select people that they're comfortable with, to develop a terms of reference, to develop a list of who's going to review the science and develop a paper for peer review, there is no objectivity there. And if we were to pick another industry or another situation, like say tobacco, this would be utterly unacceptable to Canadians. It would be a very difficult time to pass the red face test. And I think Canadians deserve more, and we need to move to an independent science stream in addition to DFO. And that way we could have shared methodologies, shared sampling, and the outcome will mean someone's going to have to take that tablespoon of Buckley's and someone won't have to.
Thank you. I believe my time is up. I wish I had more time for other panelists, but I believe I'm up.
Mr. Arnold, we'll now go to Mr. Kellaway for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From Buckley's to me, I'm honored. I, too, want to say that this study has been very illuminating right up until I'm speaking to you. So I thank you for all your insights and your experience and your terms of reference. And I will be sharing my time with MP May. And I want to make sure I have this pronunciation right. Again, it's Galagame? Is that okay, sir? Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I had help from MP Byrne on that one as well. My quick question is, we heard today Dr. Morton speak of the impact of the closing of Discovery Islands on the salmon stocks as of now, in terms of her observations of being healthier. I'm wondering if you could share your assessment, or if you have an assessment, if you could share your assessment, and then we'll transition to your answer and then to Ms. May.
Is that directed to myself? Or?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. The comments that I would provide are based upon information that Alexander Morton has shared with me. I also speak with the leadership from my First Nation, the Kwekwasutinu-Chukwamis, the Numgis First Nation, and the Mamalilakla. And they're the ones that are doing these independent science of the Broughton Archipelago. And what I'm learning and hearing from there is not very good in terms of defending the industry. We are learning that the concerns we have are indeed valid. We are learning that the path forward to protect wild salmon and the removal of fish farms is the appropriate path. It's one that, of course, this is it's an occurrence that happens, as Alexander Morton mentioned earlier, about choke points. And certainly Okosolo is one of those places. And there's just the wrong place for a fish farm. I guess in British Columbia, in regards to wild salmon, there is no right place. It's time to meaningfully transition this industry to land-based closed containment. And I can tell you, and I want you all to know, I speak with First Nations from across British Columbia that are very keen and interested in land-based closed containment. And this is the path where we're going.
Thank you very much.
Ms. May?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with an assertion, because having sat in on these hearings about science and DFO, and they're consistent. I want to thank all the witnesses. The witnesses we had May 5th were also consistent. What we see is relating to science and DFO and the aquaculture industry, not incompetence, not scientific illiteracy, but deliberate, dishonest efforts to block science, keep a minister in the dark, and advantage the industry. Now, I put it to Dr. Mordecai when he testified May 5th, what could possibly be the motive? And he said conflict of interest, that the DFO has a responsibility to promote this industry at the same time to regulate it. So I want to ask Alex Morton, rather than add layers of new voices, like a director of wild salmon, which I support, if there's rot, don't we want to cut the rot out? Don't we want to figure out how to get rid of the conflict of interest so that we're not constantly trying to chase real science and get it in front of a minister whose department should provide that minister with real science? Alex Morton, and thank you for your heroic work.
Well, thank you. I absolutely agree. I know where the rot is because I have ordered thousands of pages of conversations between DFO employees. But a lot of the worst players have left. It was very interesting. After the Discovery Islands decision, for example, Alison Webb left, the lead veterinarian left, the director of science left. And so the ones holding the ball now are riding the coattails of a long history of deception of the BC public. So I feel that they should be reassigned to perhaps move the industry onto land. Perhaps if the aquaculture management division, they may be afraid of it for their own survival at this point. But it makes me so angry that this extraordinary science that we are paying for as taxpayers, that is being developed in DFO, has been locked in a room, tape put over the mouths of these scientists. It is a huge disservice. And so I would imagine if, for example, our current director of aquaculture was said, hey, stop dealing with the net pen feedlots, get this industry into tanks, she might be very effective at doing that. But the lack of honesty within that department has become so pervasive. I'm not sure they really even understand that the lights are on and we can see what is going on. I mean, for them to downgrade the conditions of license when Maui currently has an average of 8 sea lice per fish in Quatsino and the limit is 3 that is considered safe for wild salmon, and the aquaculture management division wants to allow this to continue, well, we can see where this is going. And if we don't control it right now, we will lose our wild salmon.
Mr. Chair, do I have any time left?
No, it's gone way over. And
Sorry,
I'm not
thank
sure if you're gone way over, Mr. Callaway. So right now I'll blame Mr. Callaway because he's in the room. So we'll go now to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to yield my time to Ms. Barron, my colleague.
When you're ready, Ms. Barron.
Thank you, Chair, and a huge thank you to Madame Debienne. I'm more than happy to take this time. I want to ask my next questions to Ms. Morton. And Ms. Morton, I can't imagine how frustrating it must be to be saying the same things based on science, based on information, based on what you're seeing firsthand with your own eyes over and over and over again, and to be here again repeating the same information. My hope is that we can finally start seeing some action and some changes to begin seeing some positive movement on this. So thank you for your perseverance and for your ongoing work in this area. Ms. Morton, I was hoping that you could share a little bit with us around the importance of wild salmon, not just as an important species in itself, but looking at the impacts on the entire ecosystem and how those wild salmon are essential as one part of the surrounding ecosystem and our environment.
Well, thank you for that. So wild salmon leave the rivers small. They go out into the open ocean and they basically collect the energy of the sun hitting the open ocean because they feed on animals that feed on the zooplankton stimulated by the sun. And then they carry those nutrients up into the watersheds throughout British Columbia, deep into the Fraser watershed. And those nutrients pour down over the hillsides. You can actually see the growth rings in trees get bigger when there's a wild salmon run. And because the nitrogen they carry is different than terrestrial nitrogen, there's no question, it is coming from salmon. So salmon are feeding the trees that make the oxygen we breathe. But also when you talk to climate scientists about our best technology to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, currently it remains the tree. And so by restoring wild salmon back to where they were in this ecosystem, Canada is playing its role in reducing the carbon that is threatening our entire society. They are a power cord to this coast. They're absolutely essential.
Thank you, Ms. Morton. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit around the importance of DFO to be able to provide effective oversight at fish farms when I know perhaps you can speak a little bit to the inability for DFO to visit farms during a mortality event on these fish farms and how that impacts our ability to understand what's happening on the farms and to be able to utilize that information to best move forward.
Yeah, so trying to understand what DFO is doing in terms of salmon farms was a very frustrating, long experience until I started accessing their actual emails and I can understand what is going on. So there are long chains of emails where DFO biologists are trying to figure out what happened when there were die-offs on salmon farms. And this has particularly been happening in Clayoquot Sound and also in Nootka Sound, the West Coast farms. And what the industry wants it to be is that they died of a plankton bloom. But when you go back through the conversation, there's evidence, for example, of novel pathogens. There's alarm in scientists. There's scientists saying, we want to access that farm. We want to test those fish. But those conversations are cut off, and the final report is that the fish died of a natural plankton bloom. And so at the moment, DFO is prohibited from attending a farm during a mortality event. Now, the industry says that's to stop the spread of disease, but their own staff are coming and going on these farms. DFO has to be on those farms. And this cannot be through a group who are tasked to promote aquaculture. That just has to be taken right out of the equation. Because in my view, the way the Aquaculture Management Division has handled salmon farms has not only destroyed our wild salmon runs, but it has destroyed the aquaculture industry. If the regulations had been built to protect wild salmon from day one, we would probably have the leading land-based aquaculture industry right now, and also we would have our wild salmon stocks.
Thank you, Ms. Morton. My final question I wanted...
Thank you, Ms. Barron.
Oh,
Your 5
all
minutes
done.
are
Thank
actually
you.
up. You had two and a half sections here. We'll now go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses on this very important study. My first question is to Mr. Chamberlain. And as a fellow Robert, I don't know if I can call you Bob or not. I go by Bob here, and I've heard you called Bob, but does that work?
Been called many things in my life.
well, good to have you here this morning, Bob. My colleague had mentioned to the impacts, I guess, because we've heard First Nations talk to us about its impacts of if we essentially get rid of aquaculture in BC, it's going to have some negative implications to many First Nations communities. But we definitely have seen the evidence of the negatives of certain aquaculture projects to our wild salmon, right? We're faced with that reality. But I guess I would ask you, are you aware of any science-based aquaculture? You referred to it in your previous statement that get them out of the water. With science as the basis of your answer, what aquaculture projects could work in BC and not have negative implications to wild salmon?
I believe, and this is supported by what is occurring globally, is that the land-based closed containment fish farms is an industry that is taking hold. I'm aware that the industry publication Intrafish in the past year or so actually started to do a monthly update on this growing portion of aquaculture globally. And so when I think about it, we can have aquaculture in British Columbia providing employment and contributing to the GDP of this country. But it makes no sense whatsoever to look at those numbers and accept that it's killing wild salmon to attain that. And so the evolution, like everything else, every other industry has been brought to a place of evolution, whether it's mining, whether it's forestry. And it is time now for Canada to do the same for land-based closed containment. And when you consider that it would not need to be coastal and it wouldn't need to be Atlantic salmon, you wind up having a greater opportunity to diversify economies across the province and not just in coastal British Columbia.
Yeah, I agree, Bob. Next, I'll go to Professor Dadswell for my next question. Seeing you're on the other side of our country on the East Coast, it's good to have you here this morning. My question for you is kind of what I spoke to Bob about, and what potential positive or aquaculture projects could work with a sound basis in science. And with that question in mind, I've reached out to different countries, and I guess I would ask you before I don't want to lead you in my comments. Do you see other countries doing aquaculture better than Canada? And if so, which countries are they, and what are they doing different? I know that's a big answer for 2.5 minutes, but do your best. Professor Dadswell.
You're on mute.
Got to unmute. Oh, okay, there I am. Before I say anything concerning that question, I just want to apologize for everybody. It turns out that Jay Parsons was my master's and PhD student when he was in university. So I'm afraid he's been corrupted. Okay, getting back to worldwide development of land-based aquaculture is going on in lots of places, California particularly. But actually, one of the places
maybe I'll back you up just a bit, Professor. Is what projects would you say, again, science-based as well, would actually be something that would work without negative implications to wild salmon? And then what countries are doing that, and maybe what Canada can do better? Because you just started off with saying land-based. Is that the only science proven aquaculture that works in the world today?
No. No, there's lots of different species of fishes that are raised in sea cages, and we don't seem to have a salmon lice problem with them. That's probably because the species they don't carry too many salmon lice on them, and they haven't affected other things because maybe, like in Greece, for one place, the fishery is completely gone more or less, except for aquaculture. So, there's no wild populations that they're causing any problems to. I should like to tell people on the committee and some of the witnesses here is that land-based aquaculture of fishes is doing very well in the Maritimes. We have companies raising halibut, we have countries raising salmon, we have companies raising striped bass, and all these fish are showing up in the fish markets in Nova Scotia and the rest of the Maritimes, and they're doing fairly well, and I have never heard a single complaint from anybody about them. So, but there's lots of land-based in other parts of the world as well. People understand that, when they it's like growing chickens, right? Where you have them in a nice little barn, and 45 days later, you've got a whole bunch of chickens. So, and it works pretty well. You just have to deal with the disease problems within the enclosure, more or less.
Okay.
And the same works for fish.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much. And I will also take advantage of Mr. Chamberlain Galagame's time while remaining. I'm from the Yukon, and I'm actually on this committee because of salmon, or my concerns about salmon. And my question may be a little bit vague, but it's really going back to your point about the fundamental role of First Nations in reconciliation and in being at the table in decisions about salmon. And my question, I guess, is about governance and what the relationship between governance of BC First Nations and the role that you play or should play. I mean, is it a matter of goodwill? Is it a matter of governments? Are there fundamental changes in the relationship between First Nation and provincial and federal partners that need to take place?
Thank you for your question. When I consider the provincial and federal governments have both made commitments to fulfill reconciliation, to implement the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. This, to me, is that evolution. We must not wait for the great big silver horse to come riding in with reconciliation in tow. We must find opportunities that present themselves to begin to implement meaningfully what that co-governance and shared decision-making can look like. And I think when we do this, when opportunities arise, we are going to be able to demonstrate to Canadians that there is nothing to fear about First Nations being in a consent-based shared decision-making model, and that we can, and by and large, have fought to protect the environment, to have stronger environmental considerations in a wide range of different industries. And I believe that the global community is now crying out and demanding greater environmental protection. So I think in terms of salmon, this is an opportunity where if the government of Canada and the province was to implement by creating some measure of First Nation role within their system to engage with First Nations, someone that has the respect and knowledge, would be able to facilitate the discussion. Because when you're talking about 203 First Nations, you're talking about a lot of leaderships, a lot of different local concerns, but the global concern can be incorporated within the federal and provincial governments in some measure of First Nation advisory role.
Thank you very much for that. My next question, and I'm trying to focus on solutions as we get through towards the end of this study. But for Ms. Sutcliffe, do you see this as within DFO is are we talking about a process issue, a structural issue, a cultural issue, and what would the next steps be to get CASA and DFO to a more of an integrated scientific approach? What would be your more immediate recommendations?
Hi, thank you. All of the above, I'd say it's quite a systemic issue, and not the least of which the issues arise from a lack of capacity and resources in the department, even for the natural sciences side. Certainly, there's a lot of critique around there needing to be more investment in stock assessment, for example. So certainly, I think capacity and resources to effectively develop a scientific framework such as the one I described is necessary and always a challenging hurdle. But I think there are some fundamental sort of approaches and thinking within the department that sort of underscore culture, if you will, or maybe it's even sort of a training around what science is and even what socioeconomic science is. And I've had very intelligent, good scientists within the department explain to me that what the department considers as a socioeconomic analysis, for example, is what I would refer to as actually a very shallow economic analysis. It doesn't even go into enough detail on sort of basic economics around sort of distribution of benefit, coastal community impacts, incomes, for example. So I think there's sort of a wholesale need to rebuild really the approach to science in DFO. And I'll think about some more clear recommendations around that in my written submission, because I think that that's a really good question and one that I have a team of people who'd probably be eager to contribute to as well. And I should also emphasize the need for independence and transparency in that process.
That would be great to get written submissions. It looks, I'm getting the eye, so I guess I'm done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're getting a little bit over, Mr. Hanley. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll start with Mr. Chamberlain. And thank you, sir, for your expert testimony. And I appreciate your concerns about the impact of fish farming on wild salmon stocks in British Columbia. And in fact, I'm concerned about that as well because I enjoy fishing salmon in British Columbia. I have quite a few friends there who love to take me salmon fishing. Now, I heard you mention independent science. Now, what about if we get the independent science that you want and it doesn't match, its findings doesn't match your opinion? Would you still consider it to be independent science?
When I comment about independent science, I envision a lab, a team of qualified, certified, experienced scientists accomplishing the same science as DFO with an agreed upon methodology, an agreed upon process where the outcome leads to truth, not something that is biased towards industry. When I posted a press release on my LinkedIn page, I want to read to you what Dr. Christy Miller-Saunders responded with. A glaring case of industry's right of refusal when it comes to dissemination of science. The only interpretation allowed is that put forward by industry. Federal and provincial governments knew about this study and allowed it to stay blocked for 10 years while they funded other scientists to counter the findings. That is what needs to be done away with, that we have independent science.
All right. So the Pacific Balanced Pinniped Society has information that suggests that 50% of salmon smolts are eaten by pinnipeds as they enter the ocean in the estuaries. How would removing aquaculture remove that 50% risk of death by pinnipeds?
When we consider Justice Cohen's report, he was very clear that there is not one industry or one impact that is annihilating the salmon in British Columbia. And so what we need is a holistic approach considering all of the stressors, all of the impacts and reaching out and changing what we can when the opportunity arrives. And for fish farms, that time is now. For pinnipeds, I don't know enough about that. I know that there is support for a culling, but there's also a need for watershed restoration and so forth to assist BC salmon.
Well, I think, I don't know, everyone's looking for the boogeyman, and I'm sure a lot of folks, our witnesses here, are actually salmon fisher people themselves, and they've all had a salmon taken off their hook by a seal. There's countless videos on YouTube of seals removing salmon from the hooks of fishers. So I think there's a big question mark as to what's really destroying the BC salmon industry, the wild populations. What's the real boogeyman here?
There's a group of boogeymen, and that's the thing. We need to identify them all and reduce, by whatever means is acceptable, to protect wild salmon. And today we don't have that. We don't have an eye for the protection of salmon in British Columbia. We have mitigation plans, which have failed endlessly. And so I'm not in disagreement with you about the pinnipeds. I know that they do represent an impact, but so does flooding, so does wildfires, so does fish farms. And where can we strategically address all of them consistent with First Nation views of environment and respecting the constitutional rights that First Nations have?
Do I have more time?
You had 11 seconds, but we're going to chew that up now, me telling you that your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Oh, me now. Perfect, thank you. Well, thanks to all the witnesses for being with us today. I'll do it in French for a big part.
My questions to Mr. Dadswell. You talked about Atlantic salmon. This is a topic that is dear to me. I'm a salmon fisher and have done so for many years. Okay, if I speak now, can you hear the translation, Mr. Dadswell? That's what I'm doing. I'm speaking French now. Are you hearing the interpreter? So I just want to talk a bit about Atlantic salmon, which you mentioned earlier. As I said, I love to go line fishing. Every time I have free time, I go out on the river, and we have beautiful rivers in New Brunswick, Miramichi, Restigouche, and Amiens-Pizouit, which is my river. You talked about a substantial decline that we're seeing in the Atlantic salmon, and you talked about the fishing in Greenland, and I know that there are agreements that were negotiated to reduce the number of tons that the commercial fishery can catch. Is there anything else for the Atlantic salmon that you can identify? You talked about the illegal fishery, but what are the other causes where we don't see the number of fish returning that we would have expected to see in our rivers, apart from the fishing?
Well, apart from the fishing, most of the mortality on the salmon when they're moving out into the ocean comes from either predation by other fish like striped bass in the Miramichi, birds like gannets, which take salmon smolt off of Newfoundland, and things like pinnipeds, which eat them anywhere they are in the ocean. But the thing about that is all part of the original natural mortality that took place on salmon stocks anyway. So you're getting, what happens is if you have a natural mortality and then you have a commercial fishing impact over and above that. And if you can manage the commercial fishery, that's fine. But if you can't manage it, like illegal fishing offshore, then they can take whatever they want. And as far as I'm concerned,
so for in the Miramichi River, I think you know the problem that there is some, a lot of striped bass, but a lot of smallmouth bass also.
Yes.
I'm not sure where they are with the project of killing a lot of smallmouth bass with, I think it was a product called Rotenone. What do you think of that? Do you think it's okay to do this? There seems to be a lot of confusion between scientists on how to use this product or not. But it's having a really, really huge impact on the population. All salmon returning to the ocean and coming back also in the Miramichi River. That was one of our most important river for restocking.
Well, the impact of the striped bass, it's not tenable or anything. If you have a big year class of bass, then they will eat lots of baby salmon mostly, and the smallmouth bass will maybe do the same thing up in the river on the Par. But the thing is all those natural mortalities are pretty much adjusted by the population dynamics. So if you have high mortality in one place, that tends to lower the mortality somewhere else. But when you have a directed fishery, there's absolutely no way the population can adjust to it.
So do you think everything is done right now in terms of science, whether from, scientific like you or like DFO science on the Atlantic salmon file, that we can do something maybe better to make sure that this population is going up again, or we will never see, like you just said, I think it will be very difficult to have more salmon in the years to come. You're basically saying that, it will be just like gone. So
it is practically gone. I mean, the St. John River now, the salmon stock there has been collapsed for 30 years completely. I mean, it used to be a fish that had 80 to 100 metric tons of fish a year caught in the estuary.
So what you're saying is, if we don't stop commercial fishing, there's almost no chance that we will, see, those population of salmon coming back in our rivers, right?
Unregulated commercial fishing, yes.
Okay. Just a quick question, if I have time, for Ms. Morton. Ms. Morton, I know it.
Actually, Mr. Cormier, your time is up. I'm sorry. We'll go on now to.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes.
I have a question for Ms. Sutcliffe. Earlier, I spoke to you about the contribution of social sciences within DFO decision-making. Now I'd like to talk to you about the share of social sciences within, or the weight of it within DFO. And if there's any time left, I'll give my time to Mr. Cormier if there's any time left for our scientific witnesses. But what is the share of social sciences? What weight does it have in the decision-making, the social sciences?
I think it's hard to answer because it depends on what's being considered. Certainly, I mean, I think, as I acknowledged in my testimony, that there are, certain requirements around meeting conservation objectives that may always trump certain other societal benefits or considerations, certainly when considering future impacts and future generations. But I think the kinds of examples that I've been studying and looking at it's the absence, really, of those societal objectives that then need to take enough weight that we're not producing policies and regulations that unnecessarily create a disadvantage for our own communities, our own harvesters, and our own intentions around community well-being, which I think are very well described from the engagement process economy strategy.
Thank you very much. I'd like to yield to Mr. Cormier if there's still time. Thank you, Caroline.
Quick question for you. Since we have this study, like there seems to be a disconnect, if I can say, between group of scientific like you and scientific from DFO. So is that correct of saying this?
No, it's not, because I'm in complete agreement with any DFO scientists, particularly those in the genomic lab. So it's a split within DFO, which is so
more management, right?
Well, you have one scientist in DFO saying Piscine orthoreovirus is local to British Columbia and benign, and another one who's showing evidence that it's from Norway and is very impactful. This is really unbecoming for DFO to have its science.
Okay, I think I'm not sure if it's me cutting or you cutting, but what do you think will be the solution for just, you know, having confidence maybe in science again for some of you know, of our group? Like there was some decision lately in our region, for example, regarding shrimp or mackerel and herring, and a lot of, you know, group from the industry or even from scientific like disagrees. Like, what can we do? Is like we want people to believe in science, but at the end of the day, if there's some numbers that are not matching, what do we do?
Well, as Elizabeth May said, there's been deliberate dishonesty within the science in DFO. So open the windows and doors and let in the science from outside. Because right now, DFO science, some of it is an extreme outlier, failing to recognize the impact of sea lice, failing to recognize the impact of Tenacibaculum and Piscine orthoreovirus. But furthermore, you need to build a pathway in DFO, a conduit, a highway between science and the Minister of Fisheries, because for Miller Saunders to go and brief the Director of Science during consultations with First Nations, and for that director to take that information to the BC salmon farmers and warn them, but not to the minister, that should red flag a serious problem in the flow of science within DFO. So it's an internal, external thing that has to happen because it's so major right now.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Your time is up.
Let's go in.
We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I was waiting for Madame Desbiens, but I will go. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to direct my next question to Ms. Sutcliffe. And one thing that I was reflecting on is that we haven't spoken at length around sort of the social science aspect of it, the economic, the social. And I really appreciate your work advocating for supporting communities and protecting the environment. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit around your thoughts on what you feel is most essential for a transition plan for those workers who are working on fish farms.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback. I think that's a very important question, and something that I feel very strongly about is the concept of a just transition and ensuring that workers in sectors such as this are not the ones bearing the brunt of the cost of these sorts of decisions, and certainly numerous decisions that have led to this point. So I do, regardless of whether you do or don't support fish farms, I personally am in favor of moving to closed containment farms, but I think the idea of procedural fairness and the idea of sort of a plan for transition that ensures that these workers are not just left high and dry is a critical one. And often that's the case with harvesters as well. These are people who live in small rural communities, often are sustained off of super high incomes, have likely lower carbon footprints than you and I, and it's just not fair to expect them to bear the full cost of sort of sudden decisions that impact their livelihood. So I think there's a lot of research on just transitions, and there's a lot of comments around, opportunities for funding and retraining. But realistically, in some of these communities, alternatives are few and far between. So I think it takes a much more comprehensive approach and thinking about the economy as a whole, which is partially why I'm so interested in sociocultural science and thinking proactively at the outset about our decisions when it comes to use of our marine resources.
Just following
Thank
that.
you, Ms. Barron. It's about
done.
7
Thank
seconds
you.
left. I don't think if you get in a question, you won't have time for an answer. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's from Ms. Morton. Last week, Dr. Corman was before the committee and talked about his study on steelhead and how the major factor or the major way to manage and deal with the challenges with steelhead is the active management of pinnipeds, seals, and sea lions as the primary source and problem and primary way of dealing with the situation. So I'm wondering, in your work beyond sea lice, have you looked at that area as part of the impact? Excuse me, the impact on the stock?
Not personally, but I have stayed up to date on the science. And one thing you need to really be careful of is seals and sea lions, for example, eat an enormous amount of hake. And hake is a fish that preys on juvenile salmon. So once you start messing with the natural order of things, we also have a growing transient or Bigg's killer whale population, which are currently feasting on these pinnipeds. So it's a dangerous path. But as was mentioned earlier, if you have 5 stressors on your salmon and you can remove a couple of them, you are way out ahead. We know that wild salmon are not surviving exposure to salmon farms. They're not surviving it anywhere in the world. And so this is an impact that not only can be removed, but it can be put somewhere else. If you want to go and shoot all the pinnipeds, you may well unleash a greater problem, which is that the hake and other species which are happy to prey on these juvenile salmon. So it's a tricky road to walk.
I have one more question for you, Ms. Morton, and then I'll share the rest of my time with my colleague, Mr. Arnold. You're probably, I'm sure, very much aware of the Washington State Supreme Court decision that was done, which was unanimous and said that basically sea lice wasn't having an impact in a ruling, and that it was the salinity of the water was different in Puget Sound that caused, I guess, lower sea lice. Is the salinity different in Puget Sound than around the BC coast? Generally, are you aware of the decision?
I'm aware of the decision, but the sea lice are the problem here. We have the salinity that is perfect for sea lice, but if you do go into the southern Puget Sound, closer to the rivers, further from the ocean, you do get lower salinities. And for the farms that are in lower salinities in British Columbia, the sea lice levels are lower. But the majority of farms are in the perfect salinity, particularly with the lower rainfalls that we're getting during the summer. Salinity in the inlets is reaching ocean salinity of 30 parts per million, and it's very beneficial to reproduction of sea lice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you for sharing your time. I'll turn a question to Mr. Provost, if I could. Mr. Provost, the Cohen Report recommendation number 71 stated that DFO should develop and carry out a research strategy to assess the cumulative effects of stressors on wild salmon in their habitats. In your opinion, has DFO fulfilled this recommendation?
I don't think so. For example, some of the research that I talk in my document there attempted to look at just the cumulative effects of one specific virus and sea lice. And so that work was conducted. It found significant interaction between those two pathogens and significant effect on sockeye. However, DFO ignored that information and directed people away from that information when they had their press conference, and they concluded minimal risk of harm from salmon farms and all the pathogens associated with them.
Okay, thank you. In your opinion, does DFO have the data and science required to consider the cumulative effects of stressors on wild salmon health and to drive management of fisheries and fish habitat decisions?
That's a pretty cumulative effects is a very complicated thing to analyze and come to really strong conclusions because it's so complicated. We're trying to, assess all the different factors that affect wild fish and how they interact. Once you get beyond like one or two or three factors, it gets really, really complicated, and the uncertainty gets higher and higher. So it's a challenging problem to look at, but we start by looking with the interactions between just a few stressors.
Thank
you, Mr. Arnold. Mr. Morrissey, I know you were up next. There's a couple of minutes there if you want to get a
Giving it to Miss May.
Okay, Miss May, when you're ready, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, and very much. God bless you, Bobby. I want to go back to Alex on something. I don't know that the members of this committee would know how hard the work that Alexandra Morton does, and her point earlier about getting DFO staff into the operations when a dying event is happening. I have a vague memory of this, so correct me if I'm wrong. I remember that I think the only way you got access to a salmon inside one of the fish pens in a toxic fish factory in the Broughton Archipelago was that an eagle grabbed a salmon and you were out in a boat and able to grab it. But for that, we wouldn't have evidence of the viruses in that fish. Could you speak to that, Alex? Is that something that actually happened, or am I misremembering?
No, it actually did happen. An eagle picked up a salmon, but he dropped it on a beach, and I was able to sample it. But furthermore, I had to go to the supermarkets and to the sushi restaurants to do the sampling. But the Broughton Archipelago Transition Initiative have gotten top scientists on the farms. We are going to know a lot more about the state of health of these farms, but it took First Nations. DFO refused to allow this to happen.
My point, going back to the idea of conflict of interest, what if, I'm just throwing this out, and actually I know I'm not supposed to do this, Mr. Chair, but if any witness waves at me, maybe we can see if anyone thinks this is a good idea. Take aquaculture away from DFO and put it over in agriculture and agri-food, and put DFO in charge of wild fishery, coastal ecosystems, and marine ecosystems of this country. Would taking aquaculture out of DFO's mandate be of any use in ending the conflict of interest? I'll go to you. Dr. Dadswell is waving at me. Dr. Dadswell.
That's what they do in many countries, besides out of Canada. Almost always in places like Europe and North Africa, in the East, most of the people who look after aquaculture are in the agriculture.
Would you say that that would be a good idea for Canada to, or for this committee to examine?
Yes, it would be. I think it's an excellent idea to examine.
Dr. Morton, your hand's waving.
But you have to get the industry out of the ocean, because if you have a powerful agriculture branch now promoting it being in the ocean, I think we'll remain in deadlock, and wild salmon just don't have that time left.
But moving them on land or to closed containment and giving them over to agriculture and food production, that might work?
Sure.
I agree with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure I've used up all of Mr. Morrissey's time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you managed to turn 2 minutes into about 3. You're the only person I know that can control time like that, create time. But that concludes our session. I want to say a big thank you to our witnesses, of course, that appeared today and shared their knowledge with us. Thank you to our translation team, our analysts, our clerk, and everybody who had anything to do to make this meeting a success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Morton.
Thanks.